Professor Velthar's forearms moved in perfect coordination as he gathered his teaching materials. The morning light from 3 different suns streamed through the massive crystal windows of Galactic University's largest lecture hall. Today marked the beginning of his favorite semester, the one where he got to tell the most outrageous stories in the galaxy. The lecture hall buzzed with excitement as students from dozens of worlds filed in. Crystalline beings from the ice planets clinked softly as they moved, their translucent bodies catching and reflecting light in rainbow patterns. Tentacled creatures from the deep ocean worlds glided smoothly to their specialized seating areas, leaving trails of bioluminescent particles in the air. Gas-form entities swirled in their containment suits, their colors shifting with emotion and anticipation. Velthar loved this diversity. In his 200 years of teaching, he had seen the galaxy's species come together in the pursuit of knowledge. But today, he would share stories that made even the most imaginative minds laugh with disbelief. Welcome, fellow seekers of truth. And legend, Velthar began, his voice carried by universal translators to every corner of the vast hall. The acoustic design allowed even the quietest whisper to reach the back rows where some of the larger silicon-based life forms sat. For those joining us for the first time, I am Professor Velthar of the Xenobiology Department. This semester we embark on a journey through the galaxy's most fascinating legends. A young Zephyrian student, her purple scales shimmering with curiosity, raised one of her 3 arms. Professor, will we study the fire wraiths of Kelanos Prime? Indeed we will, Velthar replied with enthusiasm. We'll explore the supposed crystal singers who could shatter planets with their voices, the shadow dancers who moved between dimensions, and the legendary void whales that allegedly swam through space itself. The students leaned forward in their various ways, some literally leaning, others extending sensory appendages, and the gas forms condensing slightly to focus their attention. But today, Velthar announced dramatically, activating the massive holographic projector at the center of the hall, we begin with perhaps the most ridiculous mythology ever recorded in galactic archives. The hologram flickered to life, displaying a bipedal figure. It stood upright on 2 legs, had 2 arms and a single head with just 2 eyes. The creature appeared remarkably simple compared to the complex forms filling the lecture hall. Behold, the legendary human, Velthar said, unable to suppress the amusement in his voice. According to ancient texts discovered in the Outer Rim territories, these mythical beings once roamed the galaxy, spreading chaos wherever they went. Chittering laughter erupted from the insectoid students. A few of the energy-based life forms flickered in patterns that indicated humor. Even the usually serious rock people from the heavy gravity worlds showed signs of amusement by slightly shifting their massive forms. Velthar manipulated the hologram to show different angles of the supposed human form. Notice the primitive design. Only 4 limbs, primitive sensory organs and no natural armor, poison glands, or energy projection capabilities. Yet according to the myths, these creatures accomplished impossible feats. A student from the methane, World speaking through her environmental suit's translator, asked, "What kind of impossible feats, Professor?" "Excellent question, Yaranis," Velthar replied, clearly enjoying himself. The texts claim that humans formed what they called emotional bonds, not just with their own species, but with any creature they encountered. They supposedly adopted the young of other species, risked their lives for beings they had just met, and even formed partnerships with their natural predators. The hall erupted in various forms of laughter and disbelief. Tentacles waved dismissively, crystals chimed in harmonic disagreement, and several students made the universal gesture for impossible in their respective body languages. But wait, there's more, Velthar continued, warming to his subject. These myths claim that humans refuse to abandon wounded or sick companions, even when facing certain death themselves. They allegedly carried injured allies across hostile terrain, shared their last food with strangers, and never left anyone behind, regardless of the logical cost-benefit analysis. A multi-limbed student from the logic-based Cerebral Collective raised several appendages in confusion. "Professor, such behavior would lead to species extinction within mere generations. No evolutionary pressure would select for such wasteful traits." Precisely, Velthar exclaimed, his mandibles clicking with satisfaction. This is why these stories are clearly mythological, but the absurdity doesn't end there. He manipulated the hologram to show various hostile environments: volcanic worlds, ice planets, radioactive zones, and vacuum-exposed asteroids. The legends claim that humans somehow adapted to and thrived in environments that would kill most known species instantly. They supposedly lived on worlds with crushing gravity, in temperatures that would freeze liquid nitrogen, and even in the vacuum of space with only primitive protective gear. The environmental adaptation specialists in the audience, creatures, who had evolved specifically for extreme conditions, buzzed with skeptical commentary. The most ridiculous part, Velthar continued, is the claim that they did all this while maintaining what the texts call hope and compassion. Even in the face of certain doom, these mythical humans allegedly continued to help others and believe in better outcomes. A wise old ethereal, one of the floating energy beings, pulsed with curiosity. Professor, where did these elaborate myths originate? Archaeological evidence suggests they began in the Outer Rim, possibly as cautionary tales about the dangers of emotional decision-making, Velthar explained. Some scholars believe they were created to teach young beings about the importance of logical thinking over emotional impulses. He paused for effect, looking out over his diverse audience. Can you imagine the chaos if such unpredictable, emotionally driven creatures actually existed in our carefully ordered galactic civilization? Thank the cosmic forces that humans remain safely in the realm of mythology, where such impossible beings belong. The students settled back into their various seating arrangements, thoroughly entertained by the absurdity of the human myth. Little did they know that their professor's worst day was about to begin. The third week of semester had arrived, and Professor Velthar was in his element. The lecture hall hummed with the usual mix of alien chatter as students settled into their spots. Today's topic was one of his favorites, the supposed pack-bonding behaviors of mythical humans. Now, class, Velthar began, manipulating the holographic display to show artistic depictions of humans in groups. The ancient texts described the most absurd social behaviors. These mythical creatures allegedly formed what they called friendships, with beings they had no biological connection to whatsoever. The crystalline students chimed their amusement, while the gas-form entities swirled in patterns of disbelief. Velthar continued, his forearms gesturing dramatically at the hologram. According to legend, humans would risk their lives to save complete strangers. They supposedly adopted orphaned young from entirely different species and raised them as their own. Can you imagine such evolutionary madness? A tentacled student from the deep ocean worlds raised a appendage. Professor, wouldn't such behavior waste precious resources that should go to genetic relatives? Exactly, Velthar exclaimed. This is why these stories are clearly impossible myths. No rational species would survive with such. The lecture hall's main door slid open with its familiar soft hiss. 3 figures entered quietly, moving with a fluid grace that immediately caught Velthar's attention. They were bipedal, walking upright on 2 legs, just like the holographic images still floating above his head. Their hair was dark, their skin a warm tone, and they carried themselves with a confidence that seemed strangely familiar. Velthar's forearms froze mid-gesture. His prepared speech about impossible human pack-bonding died in his throat as he stared at the newcomers. They were exactly the right height, had the correct number of limbs, and possessed the simple facial features he had just been describing as mythological. The 3 beings moved to empty seats in the back row. The first was a female with kind eyes and an intelligent expression, carrying what appeared to be scientific equipment. The second was a male with a sturdy build and alert posture that spoke of military training. The third was another female with a diplomatic bearing and observant gaze that seemed to take in every detail of the diverse classroom. As they settled into their seats, one of them, the female with the scientific equipment, noticed Velthar, staring. She smiled politely and gave a small wave with her hand. The gesture was so perfectly human-like that Velthar felt his respiratory system skip a beat. Velthar stammered, his usual confident delivery completely shattered. Perhaps we should discuss a different species today, The crystal singers of Valantia, perhaps. But the damage was already done. Several of his more observant students had noticed the newcomers and were now comparing them to the holographic display that still floated in the center of the room. The resemblance was impossible to ignore. A Zephyrian student's purple scales rippled with excitement as she pointed between the hologram and the real beings. "Professor, those new students look exactly like your mythical humans," the whispered. Conversations began immediately. The crystalline beings chimed in harmonic discussions. The tentacled creatures waved their appendages in animated debate. Even the usually silent rock people shifted with interest, their massive forms creating small earthquakes in the lecture hall floor. Velthar desperately tried to regain control. "Class, please focus on the lesson. These are simply new exchange students from... He realized he had no idea where they were from. The university's registration system had simply listed them as species classification unknown and assigned them to available courses. Velthar's own mythology class had several open slots, so they had been automatically enrolled. The female with the scientific equipment raised her hand politely. When Velthar nodded nervously, she spoke in clear, perfectly translated Galactic. Standard. "Excuse me, Professor. I'm Dr. Hana Kim from the Terran Research Institute. This is Tai Park, our systems engineer, and Sue Lee, our cultural liaison. We're exchange students studying galactic diversity. We hope we're not interrupting your fascinating lecture about us." The lecture hall fell completely silent. Even the ambient hum of life support systems seemed to quiet as every student processed what they had just heard. Terran. The ancient texts had mentioned that mythical humans came from a world called Terra. Velthar's mandibles clicked nervously. You're actually human?" "Yes, we are," Hana replied with a gentle smile, "though we prefer to think of ourselves as just another species trying to make friends in this amazing galaxy." As if to prove her point, Sue Lee was already engaging with the nearest students. She had noticed a young crystalline being sitting alone and was asking about the harmonic patterns that crystalline species used for communication. Within moments, she had the shy student chiming happily as they taught her basic crystal song phrases. Meanwhile, Tay Park had spotted a mechanical issue with one of the hover platforms used by a disabled student from the low-gravity worlds. Without being asked, he pulled out a small toolkit and began making adjustments to improve the platform's stability. The students watched in amazement as these supposed mythical beings displayed exactly the pack-bonding behaviors Velthar had, just described as impossible. They were actively helping strangers, showing genuine interest in other species, and treating everyone with the same warm friendliness. A multi-armed student from the logic-based cerebral collective spoke up, its voice filled with wonder. "Professor, they're doing exactly what the ancient texts described. They're forming social bonds with beings they've never met before. And look how the other students are responding," added a gas-form entity, its colors shifting to indicate fascination. "Everyone is drawn to them naturally. It's like they emit some kind of social gravity field." Velthar watched in growing panic as his carefully constructed mythology lesson crumbled before his eyes. These weren't mythical creatures from ancient legends. They were real, living beings sitting in his classroom, displaying every impossible trait he had spent years teaching about. The worst part was how perfectly normal it all seemed. The humans weren't trying to prove a point or show off their abilities. They were simply being themselves, and their natural behavior was turning his academic theory into embarrassing reality. "Perhaps," Velthar said weakly, "we should take an early break today." But as students began chattering excitedly and gathering around the three humans, Velthar realized that his reputation as the galaxy's leading expert on mythological species was about to become the galaxy's most embarrassing case of mistaken identity. The humans had arrived, and his world would never be the same again. After the break, Velthar returned to the lecture hall with renewed determination. He would simply avoid talking about humans altogether. The holographic display now showed images of the fire wraiths of Kelanos Prime, safely extinct creatures that couldn't possibly walk into his classroom. "Now then," he began, his forearms gesturing confidently, "let's discuss the legendary fire wraiths. These mythical beings supposedly possessed the ability to... His voice trailed off as he noticed Su Li quietly helping a young crystalline student who had been struggling with the course material. The crystal being had been sitting alone for weeks, too shy to ask for help, because most other species couldn't understand their harmonic communication patterns. But Su had somehow figured out the student's difficulty and was now organizing study notes in a way that made sense to crystalline learning patterns. As I was saying, Velthar continued weakly, the fire wraiths were said to have impossible empathy for other species, forming emotional bonds that defied all logic. He stopped mid-sentence as he watched Su gently encourage the crystalline student to join a study group with several other beings. Within minutes, the previously isolated student was chiming happily as they found their place among their classmates. Tai. Park raised his hand politely. Professor, I don't mean to interrupt, but I think there might be some inaccuracies in your historical records about humans. Would you mind if I offered some corrections? Velthar's respiratory systems nearly shut down. Corrections? He managed to whisper. Well, for instance, Tay continued in a friendly tone, you mentioned that humans supposedly formed irrational emotional attachments, but from our perspective, caring about others isn't irrational at all. It's actually quite logical when you consider that cooperation makes everyone stronger. The entire class turned to listen. A tentacled student from the deep ocean worlds waved an appendage curiously. You speak as if you know these mythical humans personally, Tay smiled. You could say that. Meanwhile, Hannah had pulled out her research tablet and was taking detailed notes on everything the other students were saying. Her genuine fascination with how different species perceived humans was obvious to everyone in the room. This is incredible, she murmured to herself, but loud enough for nearby students to hear. The cultural interpretations are so diverse. Each species has filtered human behavior through their own evolutionary lens. A multi-armed student from the Cerebral Collective leaned forward. What do you mean by filtered? Hannah looked up, her eyes bright with scientific excitement. Well, for example, what you call irrational emotional attachment, we simply call friendship. What seems impossible to you feels completely natural to us. It's like, imagine if someone told you that your species' logical thinking patterns were mythological, because they seemed too organized to be real. The comparison hit home. Several students began murmuring among themselves, and Velthar could see the wheels turning in their minds. They were starting to understand that perspective mattered. But surely, a Zephyrian student interjected, her, purple scales shimmering with confusion. The stories about humans risking their lives for strangers must be exaggerated. Before Velthar could deflect the question, Tay spoke up again. Actually, that happens pretty regularly. Just last month, our rescue team saved an Andromedian cargo crew whose ship was caught in a solar storm. We didn't even know their species. Before we received their distress signal. You risked your lives for complete strangers? Asked a gas form entity, its colors shifting to indicate disbelief. Of course, Sue replied simply. They needed help. That's what you do when someone needs help. The classroom fell silent as students processed this casual admission. What Velthar had taught them was impossible mythology, these beings described as ordinary Tuesday behavior. Velthar decided to make one last desperate attempt. Class, let's focus on the fire wraiths. These creatures supposedly had the ability... Professor, interrupted a rock person from the heavy gravity worlds. I'm more interested in hearing about humans now. These new students seem to know a lot about them. Yes, chimed in a crystalline being. Are there really humans living among us? Have we been sharing the galaxy with a mythical species all along? The situation was spiraling out of control. Velthar could see his carefully constructed academic reputation crumbling like a sandcastle in a solar wind. When the break time arrived, he practically fled to the corridor, hoping to buy himself some time to think. The three humans followed him out, and Velthar quickly cornered them near the automated refreshment stations. Please, he whispered urgently, looking around to make sure no other faculty members were nearby. Don't reveal what you are. My entire career is built on these being myths. I've published 17 research papers on human mythology. I've given lectures at conferences across 3 star systems. If the university discovers I've been teaching about a real species as mythology, his voice cracked with desperation, they'll strip me of tenure. I'll become a laughingstock. No academic institution in the galaxy will hire me. I'll have to go back to teaching basic biology to first-year students on some backwater mining colony. The three humans exchanged glances, a perfect example of their legendary silent communication abilities that Velthar had just been describing as mythological. Their eyes met for just a moment, but in that brief contact, they seemed to have an entire conversation. Hannah stepped forward, her expression gentle and understanding. "Professor, we don't want to cause you any trouble. We're here to learn, not to disrupt your career. We understand how important your work is to you," Sue added with diplomatic grace. "Academic reputation takes years to build and can be destroyed in a single day." Tay nodded. "We'll keep quiet about what we are. As far as everyone else knows, we're just exchange students from a distant system studying galactic cultures." The relief that washed over Velthar was so intense that two of his arms went limp. You would do that for me, even though I've been teaching that your species is mythological?" "Of course," Hannah replied with a smile. "That's what friends do. They help each other out when things get complicated." As they walked back toward the lecture hall, Velthar realized he had just experienced firsthand the exact human pack-bonding behavior he had been describing as impossible. These beings had just agreed to protect his career, even though they barely knew him, and he had spent years dismissing their entire species as fiction. Maybe, just maybe, the ancient texts weren't as mythological as he had always believed. The next few days became a nightmare for Professor Velthar. Despite their promise to keep quiet, the three humans simply couldn't stop being human. It was like asking a star to stop shining or a black hole to stop pulling. It went against their very nature. The trouble started during the very next class. A tentacled student named Korvik from the methane-rich world of Nebula 7 raised several appendages in distress. "Professor, I'm having difficulty concentrating. The atmospheric mixture in here makes me feel dizzy and isolated from my classmates." Before Velthar could even respond with the standard university policy about atmospheric accommodations, Ty had already pulled out a small electronic tablet and was sketching detailed modifications to the classroom's environmental control system. "This is fixable," Tay said, his fingers moving quickly across the screen. "If we adjust the atmospheric processes to create microzones, each student can have their ideal breathing mixture without affecting others. The engineering is actually pretty simple." Other students began gathering around Tay's workspace, fascinated by his technical drawings. A mechanical student from the robot worlds examined the schematics with glowing optical sensors. "These modifications are brilliant. How did you learn such advanced environmental engineering?" Ty shrugged, as if designing complex life support systems was as normal as tying shoes. "Basic military training. When you're deployed to different worlds, you learn to adapt environments quickly. Everyone should be comfortable in class, right?" Velthar felt his stomach-equivalent organs twist. This was exactly the kind of impossible, problem-solving behavior he had described as mythological just days before. The ancient texts claimed humans could adapt to any environment and help others do the same. Now his students were watching it happen in real time. The situation got worse during lunch break. Sue noticed that several gas-form entities were struggling with the standard classroom seating. The university's one-size-fits-all approach meant that beings who existed as sentient clouds were forced into containment suits that restricted their natural movement patterns. Without being asked or assigned, Sue spent her entire lunch period reorganizing study groups. She created flexible arrangements where gas-form students could expand and contract naturally while still participating in discussions. She even figured out how to modify the translation systems so that the gas beings' color communication could be better understood by solid-form species. "This is so much better," pulsed a grateful ethereal student, their gaseous form swirling in patterns of happiness. "For the first time, I feel like I can actually participate fully in class discussions." "Why wouldn't you be able to participate?" Sue asked, genuinely confused by the idea that anyone should be excluded. We all learn better when everyone can contribute their perspectives. By the third day, Hannah had begun sharing her research on cross-species nutrition and biology. During the break, she set up an impromptu presentation about dietary compatibility between different species. Did you know that crystalline beings can actually process certain organic compounds? She explained to a mixed group of students. And some of the enzymes that tentacled species produce could help Zephyrians better digest mineral-based nutrients. We're all more compatible than we think. A young crystalline student chimed curiously, "Why do you study alien biology so extensively? Your species isn't even represented in most galactic databases." Hannah smiled warmly. "Understanding each other makes us all stronger. When we know how different species function, we can help each other thrive. Plus, biological diversity is fascinating. Every species has evolved unique solutions to life's challenges." Velthar watched this scene unfold with growing horror. His students were witnessing every single impossible human trait he had spent years teaching as mythology. The pack bonding, the altruistic behavior, the instinctive problem-solving, the emotional intelligence, it was all happening right in front of them. The worst moment came when Jinwoo, a disabled student from the low-gravity worlds, had trouble with his mobility device. The anti-gravity generator that helped him move in standard gravity environments had malfunctioned, leaving him stranded in his seat. Before any of the teaching assistants could respond to the emergency call, Tay was already kneeling beside the device with a toolkit that seemed to appear from nowhere. "Don't worry, I've got this," he said calmly, his hands working quickly on the device's internal components. "Looks like a simple calibration issue. These older models are actually pretty reliable once you understand their quirks." Within minutes, he had the mobility device working better than it had in months. Jinwoo's gratitude was obvious as he tested the smoother, more responsive controls. "How did you know how to fix that?" asked a mechanical engineering student, her optical sensors scanning Tay's work with professional interest. "You pick things up when you help people," Tay replied simply. "Equipment breaks. People need help, so you learn to fix things. It's not complicated." But it was complicated for Veltar's students, who had never seen such casual, instinctive helpfulness. In their societies, assistance usually came with contracts, obligations, or formal request procedures. The idea of helping simply because help was needed seemed almost magical. The questions started during the next lecture. A multi-armed student from the Cerebral Collective raised several appendages thoughtfully. "Professor, I've been observing our new classmates closely. They seem to exhibit every single behavioral trait you've described as mythologically human." "Yes," agreed a Zephyrian student, her purple scales rippling with excitement. "They form emotional bonds instantly, help others without being asked, solve problems creatively, and show genuine interest in species they've never encountered before." A wise old ethereal pulsed with curiosity. What are the statistical odds that 3 random beings would display every characteristic of a supposedly mythical species? Velthar felt sweat-equivalent moisture forming on his exoskeleton. "Well, that would be mathematically improbable." "Exactly," said a rock person from the heavy gravity worlds. "So either we're witnessing the most incredible coincidence in galactic history, or..." The student left the sentence hanging, but everyone in the room understood the implication. Either they were seeing an impossible statistical anomaly, or humans weren't mythological at all. Velthar looked desperately toward the 3 humans, silently pleading for help. But they were too busy being themselves. Hannah was helping a struggling student with note-taking techniques. Sue was mediating a minor cultural misunderstanding between 2 different species, and Tay was sketching improvements for the classroom's accessibility features. They were living proof that everything he had taught as mythology was simply another Tuesday in the life of actual humans, and his students were smart enough to figure it out. The emergency alarm pierced through the peaceful afternoon like a plasma blade through metal. Professor Velthar was in the middle of explaining the supposed mythical nature of phoenix birds when the university's warning system activated with urgent red flashes throughout the lecture hall. "Attention, all students and faculty," the automated voice announced in perfect galactic standard. Critical reactor malfunction detected in Laboratory Complex 7. All personnel must evacuate immediately to designated safety zones. This is not a drill. The diverse student body began their species-specific evacuation procedures. Crystalline beings chimed in organized harmonic patterns as they moved toward exits. Gas-form entities compressed themselves into their emergency travel modes. The rock people from heavy gravity worlds activated their mobility assistance systems, but something had gone terribly wrong in the lower levels. The emergency containment barriers had activated too quickly, trapping nearly 20 students in the underground laboratory complex. The radiation shielding that was meant to protect the upper levels was now preventing rescue teams from reaching those trapped below. While other species followed proper evacuation protocols, moving efficiently toward the designated safe zones, the three humans did something that shocked everyone who witnessed it. They ran directly toward the danger. "The lower levels are sealed off," Tay shouted over the alarm sounds, his military training immediately taking over. "But there might be emergency access tunnels through the maintenance systems." "I'm reading elevated radiation levels," Hannah called out, scanning her portable medical detector. "We need to move fast before exposure becomes critical for anyone trapped down there." Sue was already coordinating with the mixed group of alien students who had volunteered to help. "We need teams that can handle different atmospheric conditions," she directed, her diplomatic training helping her organize beings who barely spoke the same languages. Velthar found himself swept up in their determination. His academic knowledge of the university's layout, combined with his understanding of different species' biological needs, suddenly became crucial information for the rescue effort. "Professor," Tay called out, "what's the structural integrity of the ventilation system in Section C? Can it support rescue teams?" "The original blueprints show it should handle up to 3 times standard gravity load," Relthar replied, his forearms pulling up building schematics on his teaching tablet. "But those systems weren't designed for emergency access. They'll have to work," Hannah said grimly, already preparing medical supplies from the classroom's first aid stations. "We've got 17 different species trapped down there, and some of them will need immediate treatment for radiation exposure." What followed was the most incredible display of interspecies cooperation that Galactic University had ever witnessed. Tay crawled through maintenance tunnels that were barely large enough for his frame, using his engineering knowledge to bypass safety systems and create emergency pathways. His human flexibility and problem-solving abilities allowed him to access areas that the university's robotic systems couldn't reach. Hannah set up a field medical station in the tunnel entrance, treating a steady stream of rescued students. Her understanding of alien biology, combined with her medical training, let her provide care for species she had never encountered before. She successfully treated crystal poisoning in a Zephyrian student, stabilized a gas-form entity whose containment suit had been damaged, and even helped a rock person whose mineral structure had been destabilized by radiation. Sue coordinated rescue teams that included beings with completely different sensory systems, communication methods, and physical capabilities. She somehow got tentacled creatures to work alongside crystalline beings, while gas-form entities provided scouting in areas too dangerous for solid matter species. Her natural ability to understand and bridge cultural differences turned a chaotic emergency into an organized rescue operation. Velthar watched in amazement as his academic theories came to life. The humans displayed every single trait he had described as mythological, but seeing it in action was completely different from reading about it in ancient texts. They didn't just help their own species, they risked their lives for complete strangers from worlds they had never visited. "There's a tentacled student trapped in Lab 7, reported a mechanical scout bot. "Atmospheric conditions are becoming toxic to aquatic species." Without hesitation, Tay dove back into the tunnel system. "I'll get him out. Hannah, prepare treatments for methane poisoning." "But you could be trapped yourself," warned a crystalline rescue volunteer. "The structural supports in that section are failing." "Then we better move fast," Tay replied simply, as if risking his life for a stranger was the most natural thing in the galaxy. 3 hours later, when the emergency was finally over and the reactor had been safely shut down, 17 students owed their lives to the combined rescue effort. But everyone knew that without the humans' immediate action and natural leadership, the outcome would have been very different. The next day, Velthar faced his assembled class in the temporary auditorium. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by something deeper, respect and wonder for what he had witnessed. "Students," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the translation systems, "I owe you an apology and an explanation that will probably end my career." The diverse crowd of aliens settled into attention, sensing the importance of the moment. Our new classmates, Dr. Hana Kim, Mr. Tae Park, and Ms. Sue Lee, are humans, real living humans. Everything I taught you about their species being mythological was completely wrong. Instead of the anger or embarrassment he expected, his students responded with fascination. They had witnessed every impossible human trait firsthand during the emergency. The pack bonding, the self-sacrifice, the instant cooperation with alien species, it had all been real. "Professor," called out the Zephyrian student whose life Hana had saved, "we don't want to study myths anymore. We want to learn about the amazing species that are actually sharing our galaxy." A wave of agreement swept through the auditorium. Chimes, tentacle waves, color shifts, and various other forms of alien approval filled the space. Velthar felt something he had never experienced. In 2 centuries of teaching, hope mixed with genuine excitement for learning. "From now on," he announced, "this course will be called Extraordinary Species Studies, and we'll have the privilege of learning directly from species we previously thought were legends." As Hana, Tai, and Sue stepped forward to address the class, Velthar realized that some stories are called myths, not because they're false, but because the truth seems too incredible to believe. "Thank you, Professor," Hana said warmly. "We're honored to share what we know about humans, but more importantly, we're excited to learn about all of you. Every species in this room has incredible abilities and perspectives that make our galaxy a more amazing place." The students erupted in their various forms of applause and approval. For the first time in galactic history, humans weren't just stories told in lecture halls. They were friends, classmates, and partners in the great adventure of understanding the universe. The galaxy had just become a much more interesting and hopeful place. The end.